I know a lot of people have been skeptical, and that's probably putting it lightly, about Joola based on what we've been through over the last year with Joola. But I had the opportunity to go with the other reviewers to the Joola event and play the paddles, and have been playing with them for weeks. And I also got to speak with, and I'm sure you've seen some of these interviews online already, but the CEO of Joola was there, the product manager, and they discussed their focus on non-compressed cores, a 1-year warranty, and a huge new focus on durability, right? So, which is an issue for Gen 3s in general. I do want to give Joola a bit of a break because the Gen 3 core is flex, and there's some issues with that, obviously, and they are a little prone to crushing. But Joola is not unique in that sense, and now that they're not compressing cores, that should be happening less. If you're one of the people who are skeptical and you're worried about core crushing, watch Dustin's Pickleball Med, Sweet Dustin, I love him. His dissection, he shows how there's several things that are different, not just the new EVA foam at the bottom for the Tech Flex power, and not just that the cores aren't compressed, which is probably the biggest thing, but he shows in his dissection how the cells within the core are thicker, the EVA foam is actually thicker, and it is not adhered to the core. So all of these things are going to make, you know, a Gen 3 about as durable as a Gen 3 can be. Some of these things are similar to what we see in the 11624 power series, which is kind of being described as a very good, well-constructed Gen 3. So something to note in terms of durability. If that's a concern, I would check out his dissection. I'm going to go ahead and tell you about the paddles I received. I think I was the only one at the event who actually got this particular paddle. So right now, the Agassi is out, and the Steffi Graf, which this is the Steffi. It's got a slightly smaller handle, even though it's 16 millimeter. We'll tell you about the merits of it. And then both the 14 and the 16 millimeter, I did that backwards, 14, 16 millimeter Perseus. I'm sure you've already heard that all the Pro 4s will be dual certified, and then there's also going to be a UPA only with extra grit paddle as well, and they're keeping the 3S around, which if you did like the 3S series, those paddles are going to stay on the market, but those will be dually approved as well. So I want to talk about just real quickly the differences in the upgrade, and mainly it's a small, first of all, not compressed cores, which is a huge difference. But what you'd think would be just a small difference, the Tech Flex power, which I'll put up on the screen just as a small amount of EVA foam right here near the bottom. But what it seems to do, and obviously everyone's already talking about, that it does broaden the sweet spot and makes the paddle more stable. But in my opinion, it minimizes the impact of the propulsion core at the top, which was my big issue with the mod. Of course, the mod was compressed, but also that diving board type pop you got off the top that was so exponentially different from the rest of the paddle. This little bit of foam seems to minimize that. You're still going to get a little more exponential power off the top of the paddle, but it does seem more consistent, and that is true of my experience with this paddle, the Agassi, which I do want to talk about the Agassi and what's special about the Agassi, because it does have a little more propulsion off the top because of this shape. And so I think the idea behind this, obviously, that we're talking about, Agassi picked this style. He play tested a bunch of paddles and chose this. The reason I would recommend it, and tennis players probably like this, it has a higher sweet spot, obviously, and a slightly more narrow sweet spot. Brooke Buckner has been playing singles with it. It's probably an amazing singles paddle. I think she said she liked the aerodynamic, just the change in the shape a little bit. It made it more maneuverable for her. But what I'm finding is it has more whip. So of the 4 paddles that I've played with, which are both the Perseus 14 and 16 and the Hyperion 16, this 16 millimeter Steffi paddle, This one has more plow through, and I think it's because of the whip. So just the way that the shape of the paddle and the sweet spot is higher, it gives you a little more power. And I don't think it's more worked in. It's certainly not more worked in than my 16mm Perseus. I've had people playing that every day for hours for 3 weeks now, hard-hitting people as well. But still, this one hasn't gotten as much play time, and it seems a little more plush. So I know some people love or hate the look of this new shape, but in terms of playability, there's some pros to this that you may want to consider. I'm going to go ahead and go through my stats here in a second. These are what I would call improved upon Gen 3 suspension Peninsula cores. And I should say they all have 5.5-inch handles. I forgot completely about the Magnus, which will be coming out in April too. So it is a slightly shorter handle. I think it's 5.3 inches. The circumference of these is 4.25 of all the 16mm. The 14mm is a little bit smaller. It's 4 1/8. And again, the Steffi paddle has a smaller handle, and this Simone Hyperion has a smaller circumference grip as well. So if that's something you're interested in, that's a neat change for the Steffi graph and the Simone paddle, is they've made those grip circumferences a little bit smaller. Okay, I want to jump into what everybody always wants to know about these days, and that is power. And thus far, if we are talking about July 1st, when the Gearbox PPEs and the mod will sunset, I don't think, unless the 14mm Gearbox works in a little bit more, I haven't seen any numbers yet that suggest, from John or Braden or anyone, that suggests that these aren't the most powerful, and I guess it would be the Perseus, probably hits a little harder than this, that these aren't going to be the top of the power in terms of USAP approved power. I will say something that I noted that I don't know that others have, and that is that this comparison of these two, at least the Hyperions, I'm finding, and the CEO, when we talked about this in my interview with the CEO of Joola, Richard, he did say he thought the Pro 4s were a little more powerful than the 3S. So far, when I was looking at Braden's numbers and other people's numbers, they were coming in very close. But their numbers were mainly focused on the Perseus, obviously. So they were comparing this Perseus to the Perseus 3S and saying the power was similar. I'm going to say that now 3 weeks in, that these are worked in. These Pro 4s are definitely, they have a little bit more drive power and a little more plow through. It's probably fairly negligible. It's not mod level power or anything like that, but it is a little bit more power. And I have a couple other paddles that I'm going to talk about that probably have a little more power too. So we'll walk through that photo of the power chain kind of thing, and as you'll see, there's nothing right now anyway that tops this Pro 4 Perseus 16mm power. I did forget to say, I haven't seen a lot of numbers on the Agassi in terms of power, but my Steffi is hitting a little bit harder than my Pro 4 Perseus, but again, it could just be the whip in terms of serve, the ability to serve faster, because it has just a little bit more power off the top of the sweet spot. Let's talk about what everybody wants to know lately, and sadly that seems to be the power comparison. So I don't think anybody's disagreeing now that once July 1st hits and the mod and the Gearbox PPEs are delisted, this Perseus 16mm Joola, the Pro 4, will be the top of the power chain. The Gearbox 14mm will be probably close, and it just depends on how worked in it is and how much weight it has on it, and boy, if you hit the sweet spot, but that's another conversation. I'm going to show you my power lineup, and I just want to begin by saying some of these are so close. I mean, I think we can feel maybe a 0.5 mile an hour difference, and some of these, it's really going to depend on the swing weight and static weight that they come in at. And then I think some of them I could easily add weight and they could surpass others in the lineup. And the other issue is all of these Gen 3s need to be worked in. So some of them could probably be worked in a little more to hit harder than others. But when I'm talking about power, I'm specifically talking about baseline or drive power or basically serves. So when I look at the database, when people are referring to power, John Q, Chris Olson, Braden, they're all the databases. Matt now from Matt's Pickleball has a database. For my hybrid lineup, I've actually sort of done a little analysis and combined those numbers and done averages of other databases. For these, I haven't played them that long. I'm just doing some play experience and basing this on my experiences. And so that's why they will fluctuate some as well. But at some point, I'll probably analyze the databases for these elongateds too. I mean, the Joolas are new. So, and I'm going to look at this picture with you that I'm going to put up, and I'm going to say from the start that I don't even want to get into the ripple debate, but the ripple is technically an arrow curved elongated, I guess, based on its measurements. So I'm just throwing it in here, and it's still on the USAP approved list. All of the ripples that are floating around out there are pre-production beta models, which were the ones that didn't get approved, apparently, were the ones with the PB Core stamp. And I don't know of any of those floating around out there. So the ones that are floating around that do not have the PB Core stamp apparently are legal. I will say, you'll note in my photo that I put up, the top of the line power is my pre-production ripple that has a bit higher swing weight. It has like a 123 swing weight. It's the one that had the fixed edge guard and the fixed ripples. So there's probably some debate about whether that's actually legal or not, but just so you can see the level of power, and it wasn't even near the mod level of power. So what's interesting about my lineup is you see the next paddle on there is my Steffi Agassi Joola Pro 4. So it has a little more power, and wow, my Pro 4 Perseus right next to it has really been worked in a lot, and I still say that Agassi is just more plush and soft and just has a little more plow through for some reason. So that's kind of interesting. And again, I think it's partly because of the whip of that paddle. So after the Joolas there and the 16 millimeter Perseus and the 16 millimeter Agassi, I've got the other ripple, my beta ripple, that had a lower swing weight of like 109. Again, you can add some weight to that and it comes close probably to the Joola. But then I've got the Dwell paddles, both the 16 and the 14. So the Dwell Next Gen Berg Balance, which is the 16 millimeter, and the Braun, those are hitting a little bit harder right now than my Hyperion, but it is new. So my Joola 4 Pro 4 Hyperion 16 millimeter might move up the scale and surpass those Dwell paddles. I doubt it will surpass the Ripple, but again, I don't have any weight on it, and I don't have any weight on that Joola 3S Hyperion either, but the Pro 4 is already hitting harder than the 3S. And this was one of the things that the CEO of Joola mentioned to me, was that he felt like the Pro 4s were hitting a little bit harder than 3S paddles. And even though I'm looking at the databases like Braden's numbers and so forth, and they're saying, oh, the Pro 4s are hitting the same as the 3S, that's not been my experience at all. So my Pro 4 is hitting a little bit harder, noticeably has more power than my 3S. Next to it, though, is the 14 millimeter. And I'm going to say this about the 14 millimeter. I have little weight on it. At that point, I probably didn't have any weight on it at all. So weighted up, that 14 millimeter is probably going to move up on the power chain a little bit and could come close to those Dwell paddles. You could probably even weight it up enough to hit as hard as a 16 millimeter Joola Pro 4, but haven't really tried to do that. So, and then right after that, we've got the 16 millimeter 11624 power Hirache. You know, it is, I think, still well into the power category, and the Proton is right next to it, but I think the Proton worked in. This is the pink Proton now that is fairly new to me and doesn't have weight on it. It's probably surpassed already the Hirache and is going to be probably having as much power as the Pro 4 Joola 14 millimeters, right in the same ballpark there. And the same with the Fuego right next to it. So the 14 millimeter Element 6 Fuego is a Gen 3. And once it gets worked in, and if it's weighted up, it hits possibly as hard as the 11.624 at least. And then we've got the rest of the lineup is the non-Gen 3s. And as I said, the unmarked is probably the most hard-hitting or has the most power of any thermoformed Gen 2 paddle that I've hit. But mine has a higher swing weight. So that could be part of it. And it just has a lot of plow through. It doesn't have as much pop as a couple of the others. Like it doesn't even have as much pop as the PaddleTech or the Thrive, but it definitely has a little more plow through. And then the Pulse X is right behind it. So I don't, again, I have a decently high swing weight on that Pulse X, and I've got a little weight on it too, and it's working in. It could actually maybe move up in the scale, but they're saying that the Pulse X isn't breaking in much, so it may just stay right where it is, but excellent power on both of those. And then there's the PaddleTech, and I know people are going to say, because my PaddleTech is well worked in, and they're going to say, wow, the PaddleTech isn't more powerful than these other Gen 2s, but they're thermoformed and hard-hitting, and it's right behind them, but doesn't seem to be hitting quite as hard as either the Unmarked or my Pulse X. The Thrive, though, the Thrive probably has now moved up past the PaddleTech now that it's worked in. So I'm hearing this from people like, it was either David from Tickle My Pickle, or it's interesting. And then Matt from Matt's Pickleball was saying his Thrive smoke wasn't hitting as hard. It just seems like it depends on the paddle and the person and their swing weight and how much they've worked it in. So I definitely say it's leaning power, if not a power paddle. And then I debated about putting the new Gearbox, the 2, and I forgot to include the Gearbox 14 millimeter Ultimate. And it's definitely somewhere on here. Once it's worked in, it's probably near the other end, the 16 millimeters. It's a hard hitting, but the reason it's so difficult is it's like if you hit the sweet spot, it's really powerful, but if you don't, or if it's not worked in, it's really not that seemingly powerful. So, and it takes a while to work it in. So I'll have a separate review on some of the Gearbox options now that they've got these new paddles, and I do think a lot of people are going to like those as well. So that's my power lineup. And I'm also going to put up a photo of what I call a touch lineup, from what I describe as on the very left end of the photo, the most dwell and sinking feel and plushness, all the way to the other end, which is a little maybe more crisp and firm and dense feeling. But what's interesting, I shouldn't use the term dense because some of the plush paddles feel dense, but the idea is that the ball comes off the face a little faster of those on the right, and they're a little more crisp feeling. What's interesting is I don't think any paddle on this power scale really doesn't have a lot of dwell. They all have great dwell, actually. Just some of them are a little more crisp feeling and faster off the face, as opposed to the others that are like sinking in and have a soft feel. So if you'll notice on the far left, again, my Agassi Steffi Graph 16 millimeter, it's so plush and the ball just sinks into it. So it's on the far end, even more so than the Ripple. And then my Hyperion also is pretty plush. And I know that's interesting. Nobody has those yet, so I'm curious to hear if other people have that experience. It's definitely more plush and softer, has more dwell than the 3S Hyperion did. The 3S Hyperion is a little more firm and dense, but the Dwell Next Gen Berg Balance 16 millimeter kind of falls right in between there. It's pretty flex because it's a 16 millimeter. And then I got the Proton Flamingo actually my pink flamingo is soft and springy, and so it's right up there. And I know there's some debate about the feel of the PaddleTech because of the fiberglass, but on soft shots, mine is so worked in and so old, it really has a soft type feel. So then we're moving to the 14 millimeters, and that 14 millimeter Joola has a little more softness, and I don't even like to use the word soft because the 14 millimeters aren't really plush, or they're not as sinking and soft, but it definitely doesn't have a super crisp feel like some of the other paddles. So it's a little more firm, and probably because it's new and I haven't hit it as much. So that might be part of it too, as compared to the Dwell, which I've had for a little bit longer. And boy, the one that's probably really going to move to the left is the Apes Pulse X, because it's pretty new and it already is kind of soft and has nice dwell. So I think it's going to soften and move to the left a little more. Now, the 11624 next to it on the right, it's a more crisp power paddle with that fiberglass face, so it's not going to soften much. It has nice dwell because it is a Gen 3 and does have the propulsion core, but it's an interesting mix of fiberglass with propulsion core, which was an interesting choice. And then the Thrive, it's going to move, I think, too. It's already moved, actually, and become a little more plush. So it's starting to work in. I probably should have updated this picture a little bit because it's moved to the left in terms of its softening up as well. And that's true of the Fuego. I just have had so many paddles lately to play. I haven't played my Fuego as much and haven't been able to work that one in to my liking either. And it's unclear about the unmarked. Again, I wouldn't say them unmarked is like a firm, stiff paddle by any stretch. It's a 10 millimeter core. So, I mean, it's pretty plush to begin with. I mean, it's not like a super stiff paddle, but it's not super soft off the face, really. So it's a little more stiff than the rest of those. But again, I haven't put many games on it, so it could move to the left as well. But I just want everybody to see if you really like softness and a plush sinking feel, you probably like those 16 millimeter paddles more so on the left. And as you get to the right, the 14 millimeters, you know, they're a little bit more firm, a little less flex in the Gen 3 cores. That may be more your thing. Just keep in mind, the more flex, the harder they are to control. So those paddles on the left, the ball comes off of those, especially if it's coming at you fast. You can have errant fly balls off the top of those because of the flex cores and all those Gen 3s on the left. And that's maybe a little bit true of the Proton Flamingo as well, that it can pop off the top of that because it's a diving board peninsula core. So remember, the ones that aren't Gen 3 are going to have less sink and more control. So something to think about in terms of your ability to control the ball off the face of the paddles. A lot of them still are Gen 3 propulsion core options, and that's not going to be for everybody. One, because of the durability issues. And even though, you know, David from 11624, for example, has done the great things that he's done to kind of create a durable power paddle with his Power series, or, you know, what Joola has done with the Tex Flex, and they're improving in their core and not compressing. And still, there are going to be issues with Gen 3 because of the flex core, the propulsion core. So that may make them not for you. The other issue is that I don't know, the power of the Gen 3 is just something that's not for everyone as well. And in fact, this is the one place where I should probably mention that for some people who are just kind of transitioning to Gen 3, and I'll do a whole separate video on the hybrid alternatives, which I think are fantastic for people who are just trying to transition to the power of Gen 3 because it's a little more subdued in some of the hybrids. Or if you're doing elongated, perhaps start with one of the 14 millimeter options. These, and it's worth noting, and I was going to pick up the Proton too, but it's technically, I think, a 15 millimeter. But any of these, one thing to note, and I play with a group of 5.0 players that play the Fuego and this paddle as well. These 14 millimeter Gen 3s have a much lower ball trajectory, and that is true of the Joola as well, that the ball comes off the paddle faster and it comes off lower. And so these people play a very low, fast game typically with these paddles and have a lot of topspin also. So I would say this is an option to transition that might be a little more controlled than the 16 millimeter Gen 3 option, because the flex in the core is so much greater in the 16 millimeter and it's just harder to handle. I hope that this was helpful to you and that you'll like and subscribe. And also, if you're going to purchase any of these at Carbon, at Apes website, Pickleball Apes, and at the Mark website, you can use my code DRPRICE, but I'll have all the links and information down below. I hope you'll comment and let me know if you'd like more information on any particular paddles. Just enjoying sharing my insights with everyone and experiences. Hope to see you in the next one.